In this video, I'm going to show you my workflow to edit architectural or real estate photos in Lightroom. So let's get straight into it. So what I've got here is some photos from a shoot I did not so long ago of a new school that's being built. So the client was they actually built or did the fit out of the school. So they wanted to create some case studies to show off their some of their work. So first thing I've done is I've imported them into the library over here, into Lightroom, and I normally use a preset, which in this case I'll call it architectural import. So I'm going to just reset the photo as it comes out of the camera, which is like that. And I'll just go through and reset all these quickly as well. We can just synchronize all these. Check all. Okay. So you can use the synchronize just to apply the same settings to every photo. So just make sure you check all of these. So now all these photos are exactly how they come out of the camera. So you can see in some cases, like this one's a bit overexposed there. But I've taken another exposure here. So we're going to blend the two together. So the first thing I would do normally is I would put my architectural import preset when I'm importing things. And essentially it is, I just cut the highlights out, I increase the shadows, a little bit of contrast, normally the white balance is as shot, a little bit of texture, clarity, vibrance, just reduce the blues and the purples and the magentas. So the reason for reducing the blues and the purples is because when you've got natural light coming in from the outside or the ambient light from the outside, and you've got these artificial lights inside, is you tend to get a blue cast. Like you can see if I play with that slider there, you can see the blue in the shadows here and on here. So you can see it's even a little bit blue just sitting at 0. So if we pull that back just a little bit, we get rid of a lot of that blue color cast, and same with the magenta. You can get some of the, it's not showing so much on this photo, but you can get some of the color casts. And the other reason I set the highlights down here and the darks up there, or the shadows up there, is because what I'm looking for, first of all, is I'm going to take a bunch of selections, just some of the middle of the road shots for the client, and I'm going to do a very, very quick edit and send them those images, and from there they're going to select their favorite images, and they're going to be the images that they purchase from me. So I'm not going to spend all my time fixing, potentially a few hundred or a couple of hundred images when they only want 20 or 30. The other thing I normally correct is I put lens corrections here. So enable profile corrections. That's, as you can see, that's corrected the distortion in the lens and the little bit of vignetting around you see it's a little bit darker in the corners too. That helps to correct some of that as well. So that's the first thing I apply. So I'm going to apply that to make sure that's applied to all of them. No, it's not. So I'll just go through, synchronize, calibration, or lens corrections, I should say. Over here, make sure that's checked, and that should apply that hopefully to the rest of the photos, which it has. And you can see the camera here that I've used, the lens here. So that's applied all of those. Okay, so the first thing I normally start with just a middle of the road exposure, which is this one here. First thing I'm going to do is correct the white balance. Because the white balance it's looking a little yellow, so I'm going to click the dropper here, and we're just going to select. I'm going to try a few different areas, so we'll try the grey. Grey or the white's okay too, you'll see similar. That looks a little bit more green, so we'll go over here with the grey. That gives me a nice colour to start with. So what we'll do is just pull the exposure up just a little bit. That looks pretty good to me, so as a starting point. The next thing I would do is I would want to make sure that all the verticals in the photo are straight. So we can come down here, and you can do that in one of two ways. You can do that manually by like this. We can do it the guided way. So with the guided, you have to just find straight edge, which is on this bookshelf is pretty straight. So we just click it there, we hold it, drag it down, line the, we're going to line the edge back up so it's exactly along that line. That's the first reference point, and then we'll come over here and we'll create another reference point. Where possible, I like to use the building walls because they're normally straight rather than like the furniture, but in this case, so we want a line on the outside, not the inside. So in this case, we'll come over here, we're going to use the wall, it's about right. And just line it up with the wall here. And you can see that just corrected it just a little bit. It was pretty good to start with. And the way to avoid photos like this or like this is when you're photographing any sort of architecture like this, you want to make sure, or any building, you want to make sure that your lens or your camera is perpendicular to the ground, or the lens is parallel with the verticals. So by that I mean this wall here, that's parallel and 100% perpendicular to the ground. So you want to make sure your lens is lined up and is parallel with this here. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to end up with photos like this with leaning verticals. Okay, so that's the first thing. I'm also going to crop it a little because I don't really want this table in here. Take a little bit out of the bottom. I want to keep most of this table in. Take a little bit out of the top. So I'll crop it just to here. I want to leave this in here because I just want to give a bit more sense of depth. If I cropped it all the way in like this, you're not seeing the rest of the room. So I'm going to go back to cropping it like this, and rather than, we're not going to leave that, if we leave that in, that's just a little bit distracting. Okay, next thing I'm going to look for, I want to make sure the shadows are okay and the highlights. So I'm just going to reset that. If you have these up too far, then you do lose a little bit of the contrast. So we're going to I like to try and keep these. So we'll pull the highlights back just a little bit, and we'll increase the darks just a little bit. So that's giving a much more contrasty image now. We can add a little bit of contrast in there. I've already added like a little bit of texture, just a little bit. Just brings out the detail a bit, makes it a little bit sharper. The clarity, I normally increase it a little bit just to give it a little bit more sharpness. If you take it down too much, it looks very soft, but I guess it depends on the sort of photo that you're trying to create. With a portrait, if I'm editing a portrait, I'll normally pull the clarity down a little bit to help soften the features and the skin. Just a little bit of vibrance. When I'm editing photos, I like them to look realistic. I don't like them to look oversaturated. And you can also see when you pull that up a lot, you can see that blue cast that we talked about earlier is much more noticeable, and you can notice it all up here and all over here. I'll show you when I do the slider. So I'll take back just a little bit of that. I'm going to bring the vibrance back down just to give it just a little bit of pop. Okay, one thing I might do is I might just reduce the highlights just a little bit there. So brush tool, I've created a preset which is light, I call it lights reduce, where I've just pulled the highlights back just a little bit and pull the exposure back. And you can do that by just saying save current settings as a new preset. So what you do is, if you were doing this for the first time, you'd have these sliders on 0. You'd come in, adjust them to where you want them, adjust your flow to where you want. So the flow is how powerful the brush is, so how much of the effect that's going to come out first go, whether you have to go over something 3 or 4 times, or whether you get the full effect in just one stroke. Adjust the feather like that. I like a little bit of feather for this sort of work because it just helps to blend the effect in so it doesn't look too obvious. But it's going to depend on what you're actually brushing. And the size, reasonable size for this sort of work too. And then once you've created your preset, you come in here, save current settings as preset, and then you'll have the option to name it. So I'm going to just change it back to how we had it. We'll just a tiny bit over there, and just this. Zoom in, just this over here. Now I'm not going to worry about the windows in this one because I've created another exposure for that. Maybe just a little bit of brushing on the desk, just to pull back the whites just a little bit. Over there, and that's pretty much all I would do. Light fittings are, well, the actual lights are overexposed of course, but in this case I don't really have a problem with that. It looks fine to me. Okay, to fix the windows, I'm going to use another exposure I've taken. And what I've done with that is, when I've taken the photo, I've made sure my camera's on a tripod. I've made sure I've used the cable release, or the remote control. If you don't have a cable release or remote control, you can use a timer. You've got to be very careful that you don't bump the camera or move the camera, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult to line these two up. Because what I'm going to do is we'll bring them across into Photoshop, we'll align the two layers, and that will help. So first thing we're going to do, I'm just going to select these two, and I'm just going to synchronize. We'll say check none. I just want to synchronize the transform. So the transform was when we corrected the verticals, and I'm going to do the crop as well. Just so these photos are identical, because it'll make it much harder to take into Photoshop if they're not the same. Now, if you didn't take 2 exposures or more, what you can do, you can cheat a little bit, is you can create a virtual copy. So bring up this menu by right clicking it, create virtual copy. Now the results aren't going to be as good, but it will still work. So what we can do, we can bring the highlights right back, bring that back down, and that exposure is not too bad. Just bring the vibrance up just a little bit, and also we're going to change the white balance. So don't worry about what the rest of the room is doing. We're changing the white balance for outside here. So just to make that look good. You can use the tone curve too, just to make some more finite adjustments. That looks pretty good outside. So that's how I would do it if I didn't have a second copy of the image. To fix the windows, we're going to highlight both of these. Come into Photo, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop, because we want them both to open up. So that'll put them both as layers. So what you want to do is you want to just toggle the layer on and off just a couple of times, just to make sure nothing is moving and it's all aligned. If it wasn't 100% right, I'll show you what it would look like. You can see that that's shifting a little bit. So just put that back where it was, just on the history here. Okay, next step is I'm just going to put this layer on top. I'm going to create a mask by clicking down here. There's added a white layer mask. So a black one, this is hiding, the white one is hiding the layer below. If you had a black mask, that would be hiding the top layer. So we're going to come over here. What we're going to do now is we're going to paint the windows in. Get rid of that. Zoom in a little bit. So the quickest way you could do this is just roughly select the area here. I'm only going to do a rough job depending on the size of your final image. If you're going to blow this up really big, you're going to want to do a proper job and make sure you get all the edges. You may or may not need to do the black part there. Probably not. It's probably fine as it is. But we'll just see what this gets us. So do your selection there. Now what you can do is take the brush tool here. Make sure it's on black. I'll just turn the opacity up to 100 so I can just type. If you don't actually even have to highlight that, but you can just type in the number or the opacity you want on your keyboard. So if you want 50, you can type in 50. If you 100, in type 100. In this case, we're just going to go 100. So paint all that in. You can see over here, just little bits just on here. That part there where I haven't masked it properly. And over here. But I don't think it's a massive issue in this case because the image isn't going to be particularly large. You can see on the poles here, they're much darker. So again, I would just grab the selection here. You need to be a little bit accurate with things like poles. You're going to make sure you've got a slight feather as well. That'll help. So we get pick up this one at the same time. So we're just going to reverse that effect. We're just going to use the white mask. So that'll just show the top layer, which was the original. So B for brush, and we'll just reverse that on there. We'll do 100, change the opacity to 100. And there we go, we've put the poles back how they were. And you may want to do the windows as well, but like this, yeah, I would definitely do that if I was giving this to a client. What you need to do is you need to spend a bit of time actually masking them properly and go around each of them. So go around all these windows individually, and then you could brush them all in. I'm not going to do that in this case, just for this demonstration. The other thing, what I would look for now is, what I'm going to do now is this is going to be my retouching layer. I'm going to just spend a short amount of time retouching this image. It's not too much. I would pick up clean the floor up a little bit. I'm just going to use the spot healing brush. Fairly soft brush, just so it blends in. And I'm just going to do that. That's gone, that one. Some of these marks on the floor. So I'd go through this whole floor and just clean it up a little bit. Okay, the final thing I'd do to this image, I'd consider just giving it just a little bit more contrast. So we'll create a new layer, Control J or Command J. So we can go over here, we're going to choose soft light. So this is the blending mode, and we're going to you can see it's added a whole lot more contrast, but that's just too much. So I'm just going to bring the opacity back until it looks good. That's it's only very subtle, but it just adds a little bit more to your photos. And then what you would do, you would then just, you can now save your image. So you can say save as if you want to save it as a new one, or if you say Control Save or Command Save, or Command S, I should say, or Control S, which is here. So if you just said save, that would then create a new copy in Lightroom. So we'll just do that here. That'll take that back into Lightroom. And I would use just the same techniques on some of these images too. So with this image, it looks a little bit green to me. I would fix the white balance up, click up on there, fix that up. Bring some of these highlights back just because we've got another exposure. Adjust the shadows a bit, just so we've got some nice detail in here. And I'd go through a similar procedure, and I would probably clean up some of this stuff here. Just looks a bit messy, so I'd get the spot healing tool and just clean up some of these lines and marks. With this image over here, this one doesn't need much. It's really just the white balance isn't very good. It looks really very orange, so it's not really anything we can click on. That's not going to give us the best result clicking on a piece of timber. Look, it looks a bit blue. You can see it's all the way down here at 2,600. Daylight is about 5,500. So this is a very orange room because all the timber is reflecting the light, so making the light look a lot more yellow than it actually is. So do that. It looks a little bit green, so we just adjust this a little bit. Bring the highlights back in. Bring the exposure up a bit. Put some shadows back in. image just a little bit. So you can use that crop here. Just click that and then you can drag it around to where you want it. So while I'm doing that too, I'm making sure that these verticals here are lining up with the grids. If they're not lining up, well, first of all, you can adjust it this way or this way, but it may be also, if I'm there, you can see that, like along some of these, I'll just move this over so you can see it a bit better. Just make it a bit smaller. You can see that it's almost touching there, but that's not there. And that's going through there. So if I tried to straighten it using that line, then this one's going to be way out. So that's because the verticals aren't straight. So we'll just fix them. Just put them back to where they were. Then we can straighten it. And we're good to go. Nice bit of detail on the job. So there you have it, guys. That's my workflow in Lightroom to fix real estate images and architectural images. It works. It's pretty quick and easy. Obviously, it's taken me a bit longer this time because I've been showing you guys how to do it, but you should be able to edit a whole image just in a few minutes. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel too, so do that, and that'd be, if you can do that, that'd be awesome, and if you can give me a thumbs up or a like, that would be great too. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.